Hello, everyone. I'm Jack,
And this is Tony.
and we're here from Good Morning McCraig.
They'll never stop being interesting.
Yeah. So we're back for our podcast. This is going to be episode 3, and we're recording this in mid-January. And there's a lot that's going on, kind of in the world of Warhammer 40,000 hobby time. So hobby and gaming, and so we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit today. So a brief sort of talk is we're going to talk about just our general hobby, then we're going to talk about games, and then talk about some events. And then we're going to just go ahead.
We're also going to talk about, it's not out yet. It should be out in the next day or so. A book, an audio book that we kind of sent as like homework of the Infinite and the Divine. So we're going to talk about that near the end.
Yes. And then I wanted to kind of break down or take a look just very quickly at sort of the reaction, not the Tau leaks in general, but sort of the reactions that everyone has been going with the Tau leaks. So thought we'd talk about a few of those kind of topics today and see where we go. So, let's jump right into the hobby. What have you been working on lately?
So lately I have been working on my Deathwing. So I have finished 2 squads of Deathwing Terminators, the ones with knights, or the ones with maces. So I'm trying to get that army squared away so I can bring to a tournament a 2,000 point list of all Deathwing Terminators or Deathwing Knights, Deathwing focused army. So that has been what I have completed thus far in the past few weeks. 10 of those models.
Oof. Well, that's good. So on my side of things, I finished up a full squad of 10 Crusaders for Templars. So one sword brother, 5 initiates and 4 neophytes. Got those all done. I posted some pictures up on the Facebook page. I haven't hit the Instagram yet, but I will. And then I had assembled a bunch of sword brethren because I love those models, but
they're the ones with like the robes on them, right? And everything.
Yeah, they are. And here's the thing is that I put the bodies together, put the robes on the back, and then put the arms on. So I didn't follow the directions my tongue just twisted
blah,
up.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So I didn't follow the directions like page by page. And because I didn't do that, not all the robes match all the arms. And also, every robe has a little piece that brings it around to the front of the shoulder pad on one side or the other, which is cool and neat, but sometimes they seem to go to nothing. So I spent some quality time with some green stuff to bring the robes further along and make
to match everything.
To make them look natural, and then use some bits to kind of tie them in to make them look like they're connected or being held in place by something or another.
Okay.
So that was a fun project, and I actually, and this is sort of a mini recommendation, is there are these silicone sort of, I don't know if they're clay tools, but I had picked some up on Amazon a while ago, and I hadn't actually used them. But one of the things I was always struggling with was just getting those consistent, smooth lines on my green stuff work. And these things just made everything perfect. So I shaped things, and then I used the silicone to kind of smooth everything out, and it was just almost flawless. I think it helped me do some of the best green stuff work I've done to date. And
I think that warrants a YouTube video to show, because I'm sitting there trying, even because I hardly work with green stuff. My green stuff application is, stuffing holes where the plastic doesn't meet cleanly, right? That's like the application. That's the end of my green stuff. But like what you're talking about, even just shaping so that way you can have it for like robes and, you know, hiding some things is one of those things where it's like, you know, and now when you're talking like, oh, I have this tool that makes this trivially easy and I can get exactly what I want. It's so simple and I can make my models so unique. Okay, you sold me, Jack, but how do I use it?
Yeah. You know, I could do that. I could do some videos. I actually had high hopes with the Templars to do some belts and some pouches, because one of the things that I'm doing with this project is I am adding a lot of pouch bits, especially to the neophytes, because they're like the squires. They're carrying everything. So I'm adding a lot of pouches. Like these guys are on Crusade. And if you see the pictures that I posted on the Facebook page, you'll see just how kind of grimy I'm making these models, because the idea is they've been at it for a while. And so they're covered in dust and grime, but they're all decked out in pouches and grenades because, you know, they got to carry everything with them. Like,
yeah, you're the squire. You're the mule.
And so I'm going to run out of pouches. There are only so many pouches you can save and collect, but eventually if I'm going to do a full army of these guys over time, I'm going to run out. So I want to practice sort of creating some on my own with green stuff. And so doing the robes and reconnecting those robes on the shoulder pads of the Sword Brethren are just sort of the first step. So I'll probably, you know, do some videos and stuff. Stuff like that.
That blows my mind. Like I can see myself, and I've done in the past, like I might grab some extra bits to throw some stuff on. I might swap out an arm from one kit to another or things like that. But that kind of level of customization that you're doing is something that is not even entertained by my thought process in any way, shape, or form. So it blows my mind in a very literal sense, and I definitely want to see more.
Yeah, I do like to convert, and that's the other thing I started to do and just set aside is I started working on a Redempter, and I have a vision for a Redempter dreadnought that looks like the old Forge World Black Templar dreadnought, with lots of, you know, purity seals and shields and iconography and kind of this really unique Gothic arch where the head would go. But I haven't been able to. I have what I want in my head, but I haven't been able to recreate it with plasticard. And so I got a little frustrated. So I was like, you know what? I'm not enjoying where I am right now. Let me put this aside. And that's when I brought the Sword Brethren out and did the green stuff work. But ultimately, I don't, you know, there are projects you do because like they need to get done. Like I have to do, you know, in the next week or so, I rebased my entire orc army to 32 millimeter bases. I just never put the texture basing on. So over the next few days, I'm planning on, for my Speed Freak army, getting all the bases like textured and done officially. So
because you said you rebased them already, you just haven't done the texture.
Correct. And so I want to do that. So because again, one of my goals for 2022 is to actually play in a couple tournaments instead of just running. And in order for me to get my 10 points, I want to make sure that, you know, nobody's going to be like, oh, they might be fully painted, but they're not based, right? So not that it'll matter because I'm not going to win a tournament. I'm just going to, you know, go smash stuff together. But that said, I do want to, you know, make sure that basing is done. So,
and you know, it's funny. I've yet to meet a tournament thus far that actually does those 10 points. They're either nobody gets them or everybody gets it. I've yet to play any place around here that's like, oh, yeah, we're actually going to be in effect. So if you're not painted, you don't get the 10 points.
So I actually enforced that yesterday.
The one that I get to miss.
It only affected one player. But, you know, it's just, here's the thing: is so many. For the first several events, I was like, everyone's getting the 10, everyone's getting the 10. But I announced it at the last tournament. The next one we run in January, it's going to have a painting requirement. If you want your 10 points, you're going to have to get your 10 points through actually doing it, because the people who have spent all this time painting, they need to, there has to be a reward. And listen, you don't have to be painted well. It just has to be painted. So...
in all honesty, like even just putting, in my opinion, just base coats. If you just did a clean base coat everywhere, it's going to look good.
Yeah, and you know what I used for the first time yesterday is in the past for the just painting judging, I've used my own personal sort of checklist, but ITC has a sort of a generic, it's not even generic, it's a solid like painting checklist to attribute like where is somebody with painting. And so I actually used that for the first time, and you'd be amazed at how much depth is in that ITC scoring sheet for painting. There's like basing, but not just basing, but integrated basing. So it's across the whole army. Mm-hmm, and a lot of people get sort of hit by that because, if you grab a unit that you painted at a different time, you're like, you're not going to get the check for like the basing is consistent through the entire army. Is the entire army based? Yes. Is the basing consistent? And that's a check that not a lot of people got.
I see where you're going with that. Yeah, because I can also see that, like, in the sense of like, what if you had a guy, say you had, for example, the Mortarian's Legion, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Death Guard, and you brought Mortarion, or you brought Magnus, or you brought some type of big super unit, right? Your Guillimans, or even if it's just like a really strong HQ choice, like your any of like the Greater Demons, right? Those are big models. They are showcase models. They're the ones that draw the eye. It makes sense where people would base those and paint them to, say, a much higher degree, and base them to a much higher degree, maybe to a point where they don't match everywhere else because it's a showpiece.
Right.
In addition to playing, compared to, say, I just brought, like literally 60 demonettes. I'm not putting that level of work in the basing of 60 demonettes. But for a Keeper of Secrets, it's a different story. I can see where that could hit somebody, even if it wasn't meant to.
Yeah, and so, but there's some people that have that had like I'm thinking of a player that has he plays a lot of different demons, and he has Chaos Knights and things, but he has and he's painting them in a different style and basing them in a different style per god, right? Per Chaos God.
Ooh.
But you don't get when you look at those bases, right? You don't see that, and that's another thing that this checklist has is this painting checklist has like a display base that unifies the army. Well, if you have a display base and it helps you tell the story of your army, well, then it makes sense. But if you don't have it, if you just have like a bunch of different monsters on the board and each of them has like a totally different painting scheme or basing scheme, well, that's not clear based on like a generic checklist when you're walking around. But I mean, there were a couple of guys that had really unique display boards, and they helped tell the story. But and the basing is consistent. But then you have people that are like, well, each of these guys, is from a different realm of chaos. It's like, yeah, but that's not really clear. That's not so. And there are some really amazing painted armies from the tabletop, but once you scooch down and start looking at individual models, I was amazed at models that I'd looked at and been hey, that's a really cool army. But then I started looking closer, and there's not a lot of shading, and there's not any highlighting, and there's no real depth to it or weathering. It's like, but when you're looking at it from the table, like standing around the table, you're like, that looks really nice. But then when you like start doing a checklist, you're like, oh, it looks nice. It's great, and it's tabletop quality, and there are all these decals, and it's visually stunning. But when you like really start doing a checklist, right, you start losing some of the magic.
Right. Yeah, and that's why it's like, look, if you just want to get the painting, have your army painted, that's fine. You just base color everything, do a very simple maybe texture paint, and then maybe wash and dry brush the texture paint, and off you go. And you got, from a, you watching, 3 feet away, right, arm's length, the army's going to look great because your eyes will blend everything together and everything's going to look awesome. And it's going to look a million times better than just a primed or plain gray plastic. But yes, when you start talking, let's compete with our with the art. Let's compete with the painting. It doesn't surprise me. I didn't think that there would be one until you mentioned it, but now that you mentioned it, it makes perfect sense to me that they would have a massive checklist, because ITC is not for just your regular, group, like a 24-man tournament like you run, but it's also for stuff like LVO, right? Where you have hundreds of people and you bring that many people and it's like a worldwide known event. You are going to have some people that probably are, like, the best artistic army there is probably going to blow away everybody at our local event.
Right.
Because you're talking some of the best in the world.
Correct. And you have to have like levels to differentiate.
Yeah. I mean, I remember even just in passing a few tournaments ago, one of the guys, he frequents our events, and he said he went to like one of those big events that was a few hundred people, and he brought, he went to, was like, all right, this is going to be the first time I'm here to compete artistically, not just playing the game. And he's like, I couldn't even hit like the top 20. It was, those people were way beyond, you're talking like, I'm going to spend not $40, like maybe 10, 15, 20 hours per model. And I'm bringing 40, 50 models, right? This is something that's like, you need to craft, you need to, like, do the stuff that you mentioned, that you do customization, right? Heavy duties of customization. Even if it's customization to a degree of, well, I'm just making it more look like a squire. You still know that it's a squire, but I'm making it look more like a squire.
Right.
In ways that the box doesn't give you.
Yeah. I mean, I just spent, one of the things that I built was a chaplain, right? But because it's Black Templars, I wanted the chains. So I spent all kinds of time chopping different arms and hands. So I have like parts of 4 different models just to make my chaplain have chains around his wrists for his weapons. And then that was another one of the things on my green stuff list where I was filling a couple gaps. And but it's like, you go with a theme, you want to stick to it, because I'm on a Black Templars Facebook page and all kinds of people are showing all these really cool painted models. But the thing that draws my eye all the time is where the chains on their arms.
Yeah.
So, you kind of get this like sort of theme in your head, and then you recognize it when you don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to, like, if the chains, like, especially if they're, they're silver, right? It stands out on their black armor. So it's a nice, good contrast, plus the lore and the background behind it makes sense. Yeah. I definitely see, I get what you're saying with that.
Yeah. It's interesting, but did you, so that's sort of my hobby side of things. Have you gotten any games in over the last month or so?
Honestly, no. I haven't gotten any games in whatsoever. I've been between the holidays and all that stuff. I just haven't tried to. I've cut back on going to tournaments just to relax. But I haven't got any games in. The only game, there's a gentleman I met a few weeks ago, or actually a few months ago now, that he hasn't played 9th edition at all yet. He's got an army, he wants to play it, but he hasn't, he has to learn how to play 9th edition. So we were actually going to play possibly this coming weekend to teach him how to play. So
nice.
We'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's definitely interesting. But yeah, he's going to play Tyranids. So
that's fun. There's a Tyranid player at the tournament I just ran the other day.
Yeah, they're doing with the mini supplement they have. They're doing very well. I'm curious to see what's going to happen. One, with the upcoming points changes that are going to come,
right? And
also, of course, with the new rules. Once they get their codex and things like that, because their supplement gave them increased lethality if you're Hive Fleet Behemoth, but it did nothing for their durability. And also they got a new mini supplement they have a bunch of monsters, right? You can't have anything lower than, I think, 2 wounds, 1 or 2 wounds. But,
right.
So like your troops have to be warriors for all intents and purposes. But you can bring a Nidzilla list, and everything has, I think, like -1 damage and a 5-up invul. So it's crazy.
One of the things I find interesting about those sort of, and with like the balanced data slate that came out in November, and the, these little like legends or armies of renown, and sort of these small fixes that are coming in White Dwarf and things. To me, that sends a signal that the Tyranid Codex is a little bit further down the road.
I agree. But speaking of changes and codexes, even though it's not out yet, what about this whole, like all the releases of the Tau Codex? At least like now, we see all these changes, and they're, in my opinion, in general, great changes that they're coming out with. But it feels, maybe because it's Tau, but it feels like the community as a whole, there's severe reactions to this. And it feels, in my opinion, kind of unwarranted, but there's a lot of very strong opinions about some of these weapons and changes.
And I will, so I have always taken, and this is just personally, I've always sort of taken the tactic of, you see something in isolation. Now, if you're like, if I see something orc in isolation, I see it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I can't wait to see, what else. But like when I see something from like Tau in isolation, I start to think, that's a heavy 2 that does 12 damage. That's going to kill 2 orcs really, really well. And then I don't really think about it past that, because what else is it? Like how many points is that going to cost? How many weapons are actually going to have that? And so I've seen this all over, because I'm in multiple Facebook groups and different groups everywhere. And people are just, the reactions have been to such an extreme. Like people are like, well, in the Templar group, they're like, okay, well, so what? You're going to kill a couple of my guys really well. And then people are like, well, this one does mortal wounds too. And then it's like, okay, so you're going to kill my 4 neophytes. That's kind of what they're there for.
Exactly.
And then in the orc group, it's the same thing, right? But then you still get these super reactions about like, this is so broken. And it's like, we have no context for this whatsoever. And even though a huge portion of the codex has started to leak, you're still like missing a lot of the context, because like what has a core keyword? What regals do you get? Like what do marker lights do in this edition? All these different things.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you don't know. Like for example, like so that it started with like the railgun, right?
Yes.
That's on the Hammerhead tank, right? And that is an iconic tank. I love the look of it, right? And it definitely gives this purpose of like, look, I'm going to shoot one shot, but whatever I shoot, I'm going to ruin its day, right?
Yes.
And that's great. And I love the fact that it's like this ridiculous strength, ignores invols. It's like what? Damage 6 plus D3 plus D3 mortals, right? Like you're talking like on average, like it can kill a rhino in one shot, right? Almost reliably every time. And then you're talking about possibly killing a predator tank if someone's taking a predator tank, like every other shot, or like at least severely wounding it in one shot. And the ignore mortals and stuff like that. But like I could sit there like, man, if I was a Knights player, I might be concerned because I can't hide my big Knights. And if I brought the mini Knights, he could possibly kill a Knight or a mini Knight per turn, an Armiger. So I can understand if you were a Knight player, you might look at this and be like, oh my God. But at the same token, you have the max that they could take in Hammerheads is 3. Right? Assuming that there's no special rule that says otherwise. So the max they could take is 3.
Right.
And they also have the new Storm Surge, not new Storm Surge, but the new rules for it. And that's where you got that like heavy 2, like 12 damage, ridiculous craziness, right? They could take one of those.
Right.
We don't know how much the Storm Surge is going to be. We don't know how much the Hammerheads are going to be. Right? But in what other weapons that they have, and also the opportunity cost. If we take this weapon, what aren't we taking?
Right.
Right. Ultimately we're going to see what happens. And I agree with you. Taking the things in isolation and going crazy about them, in my opinion, means nothing. Right? You're getting all worked up for nothing if you're working at it in terms of a negative aspect of like, oh, this is so broken and overpowered. Because you don't know what other options that they have, right? Who knows?
And you also don't know how many you can have, right? You think about what they've done with Orc Flyers in the balanced data slate and Eldar Flyers, right? You're limiting those down. So, is this one of those models where you get one and that's it? We don't know that yet, like because none of that context is there.
Right. We also don't know stuff like, say, like how many commanders do they get to have, right? Commander spam was usually a big thing. How many ethereals that they're going to have. Some of the leaks that I've seen, ethereals are actually going to be like a chaplain now.
Right.
That they have a chaplain-like mechanic. Again, marker lights. And if I remember properly, Tau Army is very big on interacting with each other, kind of like how Space Marines are, of stacking buffs and, have one unit mark a light an enemy unit so that way something else can attack it in a much more efficient manner.
Well, the way to play Tau in 8th edition was castling. Like you just stacked everyone up. It's one of the reasons I think all the changes to objectives and secondaries happened was just how good the aura abilities were stacking in that castle that Tau would make. And then you couldn't get close to it, and it would just blast you to bits, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because I, like, even as Dark Angels at the time, I would castle. Because you could have Azrael in the middle, and all of a sudden, all your units, unless they were a vehicle, all your units got a 4-up invul. Just flat out 4-up invul. So now, what happens when you take aggressors? And they can double shoot and have a 4-up invul. So your T5, 4-up invul, 3 wounds, and you're shooting like 70-something shots.
Right.
But yeah, like castling was a major aspect And I am glad, personally, that the rules discourage castling nowadays.
Right.
But it did leave Tau in a manner that, unlike Space Marines are adaptable, right? At the very least, your medium infantry that can bully light infantry, you don't have that with Tau.
No.
Right? So they need ways to be able to hold objectives, and right now they don't.
Right. And, we also don't have any idea what suits do and what weapons they can take, or even things like leadership, right? You're only getting the Dark Strider character as an updated character. Everything else is as it is, right? So with close combat being so much of a larger part of 9th edition than 8th edition, can they do anything about that? Or is it, well, we can blast you really well turn one, right? But if you get into our lines, like if I go first with my evil sons, I'm reliably getting 2 charges off on turn one. I might be able to get a third off depending on how my opponent's set up and how I set up with deployment. So, okay, so if I go first, now what, right? Like, so now I'm in combat with you with, a couple of my, with my Storm Boys, one other unit, with my Truck Boys. Now what are you going to do as Tau? We don't even have any of that context yet. So when I see these weapons in isolation on Warhammer Community, and then I see everyone reacting to it, I just think like we really have no idea, like none.
Yeah,
right?
We got to see what else is going to happen. Plus, with the new traits and everything like that, everything that's going to happen, and also like what we think is going to be awesome may not take the tournament by storm. It just may end up being something else, like bringing a super heavy. Like, okay, they have that super heavy with that awesome gun. That's 3 command points right off the bat.
Right.
If you're going to bring them.
Who would have thought that the Orc Codex would shift your Morkanaut Gorkanaut over into a super heavy detachment? Like that blows my mind because, right, like, oh, they're going to buff the strength and toughness and like make it more effective, but we're shifting it to a super heavy. And I'm just like, wow, that was for my Bad Moon army. Like that was sort of a linchpin of the army. Mm-hmm. And so fundamentally I have to make a decision. I mean, of course I have to rebase that entire army, but, because they're still on, 25 millimeters, but it was the linchpin. And now the question is like, do I spend the 3 command points to take, a model, or do I double battle wagon? You know what I mean? Instead, because it just might be better to have double battle wagon and keep those 3 command points, right?
Right, because there's a lot that you can do with those 3 command points.
Well, yeah, you can teleport people into the backfield turn 1, right? Like, yeah, or I don't know. So I'm finding myself getting sidetracked because there's so many different things. Like when the Orc Codex came out, like you couldn't have predicted that the freebooter, the freebooter
dominance
bonuses,
of freebooters,
right? And sort of that Orc soup was going to be so effective, right? Like I don't think people really understood that sort of thing. And now they're talking about like just how broken Tau are. It's like we don't even have the context for it. So right.
And also, especially now, like the game is very, I don't want to say intolerant, but it's not like 8th edition anymore where shooting is the end all be all. It's still beneficial, obviously, but at least on most tournament boards, and the shooting turn 1 is largely nullified. Nullified. Unless you're a Knights player, then you're just screwed. But the rest is like you can hide 80-90% of your army, typically. And if you're in a board, if you're in a tournament that you can't hide 80 to 90% of your army, you probably just don't have enough terrain on the board. So the close combat is very important. Positioning is very important. And Tau, unfortunately, they needed those buffs in 8th edition, because without him, they were basically Astra Militarum in terms of effectiveness without the orders. Now,
right.
Obviously, the gameplay nerfs how they do business, and you can't castle up or anything like that, and a lot of their guns and a lot of their units by themselves just don't make the grade, and their guns were never anything to write home about. A lot of the stuff that they've leaked or they've deliberately released, those guns now they're much better, even if you're hitting on 4s. Like a 10-man fire warrior team could probably do some serious work with those rapid fire. They have longer range, which that itself is nice. It's more you get rapid fire at a better range, and it has a pip of AP. So they're definitely getting a boost. I feel like if you're going to be an army that's only good in one phase, technically 2 phases, they should be good in movement and shooting, and that's it, then you really need to be good at moving and shooting. Not just mediocre.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also the idea that, this isn't Games Workshop from 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that were never updating and never releasing facts, and were never rebalancing. I mean, they are actively rebalancing with multiple releases every year. I mean, you're not going to, if something is overly broken, I mean, outside of Drukhari, because of the fixes that they've used just haven't been enough. But if they're keeping everything balanced, there are a lot of factions that are sort of fighting at the top. You have Orcs, you have Drukhari, you have
your Grey Knights and whatever.
I'm sure that you'll see Custodes back towards the top there. And, some sisters lists are good. I saw a Necron player who was he won his first 2 matches at the event the other day, and he lost against he ended up losing against, I think, what was that? Was it a Knights or Death Guard? That's what it was, Death Guard. I see so many Death Guard armies. I think there were 3 at the event that I ran the other day. And so, the Death Guard just did, coming back to life better than the Necrons did. But I've never seen Necrons do so well. So 2 out of 3 at a solid tournament with some pretty awesome competitive folks. I was pretty blown away. I've never seen this guy play ever, and he just shows up. He has Necron Horde with Silent King, and I was like, dude, you shows up means business. He's like, I'm not joking. I'm bringing the big boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like, I don't know. I have the Silent King, but I haven't put him together or built him yet, or painted him yet, and it's just, I feel like Horde is kind of good. The list that I have now has a good amount of units, but I also have the Nightbringer, a custom model for the Nightbringer, one from Creature Caster.
Oh yeah,
because you have the Nightbringer that they put out, and it just looks so small and dinky compared to, say, the Void Dragon that they put out.
Right.
And I feel like something like for the Nightbringer and what he does, I need that oomph. So
right.
But
that's just one of those, if you're, come on, GW, I hope in the next 2 years, when Necrons kind of get their single model update, it's something like, hey, here's a Nightbringer, what's the name of the other one?
Oh, the Deceiver.
Deceiver, right?
They both need updates.
Yeah, and we look like, it's looking like the Eldar or Craftworld Eldar are going to be getting one of those sort of updates where you're getting a significant number, but there'll still be a handful of models that will be like, okay, when's the next wave coming, right?
Yeah. Definitely. And definitely that the Necrons are probably going to be in, possibly a similar boat because they still have some, those units are still fine cast. They're not that great. And they're also just a size too small compared to how everything else that they're doing, where it's like, look, I'm bringing a 300 plus point model. I want it to look awesome. Right? If you're going to have like a Greater Demon of Khorne, a Bloodthirster, and it's like 200 something points, and it's this big, massive opposing thing, and it's not even like a Lord of War. It's like, oh, I'm just an HQ that's going to literally ruin your day. And then you have like something that's probably almost twice the cost, and it's maybe half the size, and then it just moves up and just smites that thing in like one go.
Right. Like, I think about it, like when I see old Be'lakor compared to new Be'lakor, right? I'm like, well, if you're going to bring old Be'lakor, you better use old Be'lakor rules.
Yeah. But like you bring the new Be'lakor, he's like, look, I'm here, right? Everyone look at me because I'm going to be the center of the party.
Oh man, I hate Be'lakor so much. So badly. Ugh.
I love it. I love the big models. I love the centerpiece models because once they're painted, even if they're painted in an okay manner, like I said, just base coated, they draw the eye.
Agreed.
So moving on from the tournaments, what have you, let's talk about this book a bit. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So you said that you've only, we said this before we started recording, they've only been about halfway through. What do you think of the book thus far? And before we actually start, so we mentioned this in the last podcast, the podcast that isn't out yet, oddly, but the podcast will be out by the time that you listen to this. This is going to include some spoilers. So if you don't want to do any spoilers, you the listener, then bear that in mind. But this is your final warning on spoilers before we continue. So tell me, Jack, what are you thinking?
So, in the last podcast, I told everyone, I think that I was really hesitant about Necrons, and having them kind of carry a book forward. But my mind has totally changed, and they have done a really great job of taking characters, right? And this book focuses on Trazyn, the Infinite, and Orican the Diviner, or Diviner, I don't know where to enunciate that. Yeah, and they're these two old ass men, basically like millennia old. They're in like this, it's like grumpy old men, right?
Yeah.
They're bickering back and forth, and they're breaking each other's shit, and they're causing all kinds of problems, and they're Necrons, right? So it's like they literally are killing each other, even though they know that the other one's just going to come back. And like one of the best, so, to kind of get into the overall plot is, right, Trazyn, for the people who don't know, he's the guy that collects stuff, right? And at the end of 7th edition, when Cadia fell, he showed up at Cadia to help the Imperials because, and he was throwing out all these like random groups of people who he had captured. There's like, oh, these guys need help here. I'm going to throw out these like heresy era guys that I had captured, right? Here's some random Ultramarines out of nowhere. He's like, that's where the Inquisitor, the Inquisitor lady with the pipes, the stovepipe cap came from. She was like released, right? And so he had collected an artifact that he didn't really think anything of. It was like old school Necron stuff from the origins of the Necrons, just this old kind of weird boxy thing. But Orican had realized that it's like a huge key into this sort of stasis vault of some of the original people who were like, they didn't just like become Necrons, they were like became something more. And there's this, and I haven't kind of figured out exactly what they do yet. But so Orkin is going, he shows up to steal this thing, and Trazyn catches him, and then Orkin wins by basically destroying his art galleries until he gives in. And It's just like such a kind of diabolical move. But these guys have been bickering and fighting for literally a millennia. And so they're doing these things over the course of literally thousands of years. And, you know, what I love about it is you get the sense of time in scale when they're like, you know, they're talking about Eldar Exodites, which, by the way, makes me want to buy some Lizardmen models from Age of Sigmar and merge them with some Eldar to make some cool Exodites after listening to, like, the first couple chapters. But that was... the scale of time, like you start with Exodites, and then like a few, you know, like hours into the book, it's like they're talking about humans settling a planet for the like as they go out to the stars, and then they mention the Great Crusade, and then they mention the Horus Heresy briefly, right? And so all of this is happening over such a span of time that humans hadn't even settled the galaxy. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and they're in the point of, like, to them, time is meaningless, right?
Absolutely,
because they're immortal.
Meaningless.
And to them, it's like, oh yeah, I remembered when this planet was first settled, you know. And like even Trazyn would speak about that stuff later on to like a human. He's like, yeah, I remember when this planet was first settled, and then it was settled again, and then it was settled again, and then it was settled again, right? Like, to him, it's meaningless. Like the time scales for both of them are meaningless.
Yeah, and things like Trazyn gets mad and like they're stealing this thing back and forth from each other, and then one day Trazyn just shows up and just shoots him and walks away. Doesn't even steal the gem thing back.
He's like, I'm done.
Shoots.
Yeah, I remember that. He just shows up and he just shoots him, and he walks away, and he's like, you're not going to take it? And he's like, I don't care anymore. You can have it. Get lost.
But there's so much, like, I've been listening. I thought that this book was winding down, right? And you know, for the listener, like I lost I listened to audiobooks on my way back and forth to work, but I lost 5 days of driving. So like half an hour each way, which is an hour a day. So I'm about 5 hours behind. And I thought I was getting close to the end of the book until we started talking about it before the show. And I was like, well, let me just check how much I have left. And I have 5 hours left. And I was like, wait a minute. Where are they going next? Like, I'm fascinated because the story it captured me so, right? And I don't know.
And I'm not going to spoil the rest of it. I'm only going to go up to the point where you've gone. Yeah.
So right now they're on basically... they're on trial, for they failed to get into this like sort of, I don't know if infinity gate. They failed to open it underwater, and then like the big like council showed up and they dragged them basically to Necron court, and it's just, I find it fascinating because. For me, I'm like, oh, this is a great place to end it. Like, neither person won, but clearly it's not over. So It's fascinating to me. And again, I very much was hesitant to start this book. But yeah, I lost all that time because I got the Cove. Even after all my boosters and vaccines, I still got the Cove. So I lost a bunch of days of driving in and out of work over the last couple of weeks. So then I just, it reminds me that I should try to listen while I paint a little more. Because for Christmas, my wife got me these really cool headphones that don't stick in your ear. They like vibrate on the bone. So it's like just more comfortable. I can just easily sit down and be painting and listening. So I should probably do that. But Trazyn and Orkin, like, I mean, I think Oricon's the bad guy, and but I don't know if they set it up this way for me to be like, I just enjoyed Trazyn a little bit more as a character.
I would agree. I like Trazyn. I really like Trazyn. He's basically like the Ash Ketchum of the Pokemon reference. He's Ash Ketchum of 40K, constantly capturing things, and he's like compulsive at it, right? Like he can't stop himself. Like, did you get to the point where they were talking about the orc Gargant or the I think it's a Gargant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, he's getting it. It's sinking into the water. He's sinking into it with him, and he's got his aide next to him, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, we're gonna need a bigger Pokeball here." And he's like,
"Yeah,
even now?" He's like, "Yes, I definitely want that. I'm already picturing where in my museum where I'm gonna have it, so I want it." And guys, and the thing is that this is a thing that I like what they do with Necron culture, right? Is that everything is centered around the nobility, more so than what you would see of like the humans with the nobility, where literally, if you are not a noble, you are nothing.
Yeah,
right.
Like it's not even a crime to sacrifice all the thralls.
Yeah, that was the thing. It's like if you killed like 10,000 warriors and maybe like 2,000 immortals and you just lost them. It's like, we don't really care about their lives lost. We think of it more like we lost assets.
Yeah.
We lost we just lost a bunch of Jeeps and the fuel that went with those Jeeps. Like that's how you're thinking about it. Like you lost capital, not lives, not individuals. Now, if you lost an overlord or a lord or someone of nobility, that's a different story. And they make reference of that. Like I could have lost 10,000 people and be like, "Oh, just pay to compensate and we'll call it a day." But if I killed a nobleman, now we're in court.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. Though there does seem to be an exception in the sense that underwater battle, right?
Right. They couldn't
reanimate because of
Correct.
the location and the material, so they could not reanimate. So now I can understand it makes more sense now. We're like, oh, you lost 10,000 warriors. Pfft, who cares? We just reanimated them. Oh, you lost 10,000 warriors and they're gone. That's a permanent loss.
Right.
Now they take it seriously, but still in the context of you lost material, not people died.
Correct.
So I find that interesting, right? They just don't care. And obviously there's degrees, right? Like the warriors, who cares, right? They are chaff. But even the advisors, right? It's, like I said, Trazyn's like, "Yeah, go get me the stuff to grab the Gargant," while they're sinking underwater,
right.
Staring at it. And the guy's just like, "All right, should I get the big pink one or should I get the big blue one? What do you think will look better?" "Oh, I think the blue one would look better for this one."
I found it, one of the things I found very interesting was the destroyer cult. Because one of them had unleashed destroyers on the world, and that part hooked in my brain. This conversation with this thing that was basically killing every living thing,
Yes.
And that was for me just fascinating because it's like, oh well, there were like this many of us, and but now there are, now there are only 3 of us, so now it's going to take us 56.4 years in order to destroy every living thing on this planet, right? Like they're constantly recalculating. And it's just like, I don't know, like these little details that they've put in this book that add so much depth to this race of people who, for me, for the longest time, were just devoid of any sort of real, like, character and sort of dynamicism sort of thing. So I'm just kind of fascinated, honestly. I love it. I'm so glad that we did this book. I'm sad that I didn't finish it, but I was I thought that I was almost done, honestly.
It is an interesting book. I like the ending, and I like how these guys have like a professional rivalry, typically, where it's like, yes, out of the limelight of the other nobles, we're gonna backstab each other, we're gonna sabotage each other, we're gonna do everything we can to get up on one another. But then when it's like, oh, someone else comes in and it's like, what are you guys doing? All of a sudden we're like, yeah, I don't like him, but I agree with him. And yeah, I don't like him either, but I think he's got a point here. Like, they get each other's backs if there's a third person trying to interfere.
Well,
it's like a professional rivalry. They hate each other, but it's also kind of like, he's my brother. No one can pick on my brother but me. Yeah.
It's sort of like the military. It's like, the Army picks on the Navy and the Navy picks on the Marines and all of this stuff. But if you came at one of them and you weren't anyone, then like suddenly it's like, what are you talking about? Who are you? Why are you talking?
Yeah, exactly. Like everyone backs each other up, or like even within the military, right? You have, I'll have my platoon and we'll be picking on each other all the time, right? But then we go into competition with other platoons that are in the regiment for something, maybe something for drill or something for shooting. And now all of a sudden, everyone in the platoon's got each other's backs.
Right.
Because and every platoon is fighting each other in the regiment.
Right. And I see that because in this trial that they're in, right, which is about where I am, is like there's this third guy that was mentioned earlier in the book that went out looking to try to solve this mystery that they're using this cube to open up this infinity gate, and this guy disappears, and both of them are like, well, we've been on and off this planet for a long time, and this guy hasn't been around, and we haven't seen any Necron, and we've both been pretty aware because we know this other guy's here, right? Like Trazen's like, yeah, I'm always on the lookout for this guy, so I'm always looking for Necrons. Right. And Oricon's like, yeah, I would have noticed because I'm always looking over my shoulder because of Trazen. Right. Mm-hmm. So if this third guy, we don't know what the hell happened to him. And I know that if Trazen had done something, he would have blamed me by now. And right. Trazen's like, yeah, if Oricon had done something, he would have tried to blame me by now. So I'm pretty sure, even though I don't like this guy, he's not dumb enough to do to murder off some other aristocratic Necron, right? So it's really, it's this interesting sort of ebb and flow with these characters.
And at the same time, they're also like, at least Oricon is like denouncing that person. They're like, well, if he died, well, it's probably because of his own incompetence. That's what he is. Right. He's incompetent. Yeah. So why are you like, yeah, he's incompetent, but like I didn't kill him because I have better things to do, like my rivalry with Trazen.
Right. Like, I'm going to randomly show up and shoot this guy, but I'm not going to, I know he's still going to live because, we all have all our backups, but like this other guy, he's not even a blip on my radar compared to
he's not even a contender.
Right.
Yeah. And I also like how they portrayed that even though these guys are millions of years old, like 65 million years old each, and they have tech that is so advanced. I do like the fact that they have tech that's so advanced that some of that tech, or a lot of that tech, to them is mundane.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're little dimensional pockets that they keep grabbing things out of. Right?
Yeah.
It's as common as pockets on guys' pants, because apparently girls' pants don't have pockets. But like it's so common, right? But then they have tech that is like relics, right? Like when Trazen went and got the Time Splinter cloak, because he realized if he goes up against Oricon directly, Oricon has the ability to rewind time, or rather he casts his consciousness backwards in time.
Right.
And with all the memories of the present. So he does that, and then he can make changes. So Trazen is aware of that, and he can't. He's like, he needs this relic that he steals to counter. So anytime Trazyn goes back in the past, he uses the cloak to block his mind going back in the past to nullify that advantage.
And at the trial that where they're all discussing this, the trial sort of in the middle of the book, they're like, hey, by the way, we noticed some errors in the timeline at the last meeting. Therefore, if you look around, we've refurbished by like putting in all these time blockers so nobody can do their chronomancy.
Yep. And he's like, oh, how dare you think that I would do that when you read, like, that's exactly what he did over and over and over again to get the outcome that he could tolerate.
Right.
And I love it, that deviousness of him.
Yeah.
But
and
go ahead.
I find like this is something that is right. I think, that they've taken characters for me that were kind of flat and bland and were humorless and they've added a level of character to them that I feel the Necrons have been missing for a while. And so I hope that they find a way to do this with other sort of races, because I feel like, you can't really do it for orcs. Orcs are all sort of one thing, but, maybe Eldar and Dark Eldar, like in other novels, I feel like hopefully they can do stuff like this that adds a layer of depth to other sort of alien races that, like, hey, Black Library, it's not just Imperium and Chaos. There are all these other races that can actually tell a good story. Right.
And I agree. But I can also see from a structural perspective, even assuming all sales were equal, from a structural perspective, it is easier to have your audience interact with human protagonists,
right,
than it would be an alien protagonist. Now, that being said, structurally, for both narrative reasons, lore reasons, and also book reasons, Necrons kind of have it made for an author, because you can have this vast galactic empire, right? But you also don't need that many characters, because it's not like humans where every person is a character. It's deliberately centered on the upper one of, 0.1 of 1%, right?
Right.
They are deliberately like, these are the people that only matter. Everyone else is really just like a servitor or something that's there to supplement that person. And they don't have thoughts of their own. So it makes it much easier for them to both justify lore-wise and narratively. You're just focusing on like one or two core people, and it works. Well, you couldn't really do that in humans because everyone has their own opinions and everything like that, and that doesn't work. So I do feel like it's definitely unique enough that it's clearly not human, but they have humanized them so I can understand them. Orokin comes off as really a grumpy old guy who's in it for self-power.
Yes.
So that's where he's getting like that evil vibe or that crotchety old man vibe. And whereas the flip side, you have Trazyn, who's into it in terms of like an altruist, like he is a history person. He's into the arts. He's into literature. He wants to know what these people are all about. Even humans or even the orcs. He's all into, what are these people about? What are their beliefs? What are they scared at?
Right. He has like he sets them up in these scenes that he is painstakingly, like they're frozen in time, but they're painstakingly posed to be accurate, right?
Yeah, and he's in it, and we're talking like painstakingly posed as in, I personally took 200 years to meticulously compose and situate everything in this living diorama.
Right.
And, you know, the attention to detail is something that would make any museum curator jealous.
But the thing with Trazyn, which is interesting, is it's selfish as well, but it's about showing off his collections, right? Like, that's mine for my collection that everyone will someday come and walk through in a millennia when everyone wakes up.
Right. And, you know, and at the same time, it's also like he's doing this for a people who he even says himself has culturally stagnated, right? There's at least one point in the book where he mentions specifically, like, we were never really good musicians and artists before biotransference.
Right.
And then once we lost our souls, that stuff died outright. We just don't have that anymore, period.
Right. Like, they've all, like, huge swaths of collective memory are gone because the biotransference process, like, just, like, shattered parts of the race, right? The entire empire, right?
Yeah, and there's definitely pieces where, I mean, only in 40K where you could have this technologically advanced society that, you know, there's probably a good many people that would be like, I would love to become like a Necron, go through, I know biotransference is painful, but I could then turn around and be an immortal robot that could do whatever.
Right.
Forever. But they, like, only here would you would in 40K in grim darkness where even this race is having a hard time because they are hampered. Because if you can easily see where if they were at their might, they would wipe out everything. There would literally be no challenge. So they're hampered in every way.
Right.
Probably more so than even humans. They're just hampered in everything. But I also find it interesting that there's aspects about them that they find that, you know, they'll comment on other ones. I remember specifically he's talking to Orican and they're walking around and he was talking about the humans, and Orican, you know, hates humans. He thinks they're you know, blah. And Orican's talking about them. He's like, oh, but they do have their flaws. Like, did you know that their sexual reproduction and how they get rid of excrement comes from the same place? Did you know that? and Orican's like, why did you tell me? I could have gone on living without this. And they both have like a moment like of humans. Right. I thought that was so funny.
But that's the thing is, like, you see, like, they are, I mean, the story starts off with Trazyn basically taking the heart out of a world, out of civilization, and being like, oh well, right? This is going to fundamentally eliminate these Eldar the old Eldar.
They're like Exodites or whatever.
There we go, the Exodites. But that's okay because I got my object, right? Like, there's this lack of any sort of compassion or caring because they're so far removed from it. But then, right, then you get to a point like where they're like, oh yeah, humans do this, right? And it's just there's almost both a fascination with life and this casual disregard of it, like at the same time, in the same book, existing at the same time, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, even Trazyn, who is probably the closest that you'll see to somebody who values life, he only values it in the sense of that it's a unique oddity. It's a trinket. It's, oh, you guys accomplished something that I didn't think that you could accomplish. Let me put you in a stasis field for the rest of eternity as something that I would enjoy to look at from time to time. Right. You know, that's how he sees it, right? That's ultimately how he sees it. And it's, I don't know. I just find that they definitely made them more human-like, so that way we can understand them, but also still maintain that alien aspect that they see things at a fundamentally different level. And there's also, I don't think you've gotten to those points yet, but there's also spots where it's like, oh, in this spot, you should feel fear. Like even a space marine would feel fear, but they don't.
Right.
They recognize that there's a threat. They recognize that it's a serious threat. They even recognize that I'm probably going to die and there's no way out of this and I'm not going to resurrect. This is going to completely ruin my day. And they treat it in the same manner that's like, oh, like in the same manner that somebody might be in a bad traffic jam.
Right. It's just part of their day.
Yeah. And it's just like, oh, I just came across this horrible world-ending, galaxy-shattering event. Where's my coffee?
Right.
And then just like move on.
Right. And you know, for me, I was really fascinated by just how, so this is a book that's really focused not on the humans at all, but they're a part of it. But you have the humans, right, and Space Marines are mentioned, but you also have, right, Exodite Eldar. There's a significant section on Trazyn having to recapture and recalibrate his Hrud gallery because his Hrud gallery stasis field shifted and they got loose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a lot of about orcs, and I'm only I still have 5 hours left. Who else is showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just fascinating to me. I'm really interested, and I'm kind of excited to get back to listening back for my commute back and forth. So
yeah, it's definitely, I think the movie ends really well. There's definitely some good one-liners. I remember one, I'm going to spoil this one-liner where Orokin tells, I think I mentioned it last time, where Orokin asks Trazyn, he's like, I hope you brought an army with you in one of those boxes because we're going to need it. And Trazyn just goes like offended. He's like, Orokin, my dear colleague, I am offended by you. I brought 5. That's how he is, and it's just hilarious. And he just does this stuff, right? He's and like what you mentioned earlier, he has these little Pokeballs that he whips out, and apparently it's not deliberately explained, but it's touched on very briefly that when he captures something for these Pokeballs, he has, I don't know how he does it, but he basically has mini scarabs.
Yeah, the mind shackles.
Yeah, they mess with the living person's brains while they're inside. So when they come out, their perception is the Necrons are just like them, or they're friendlies, or whatever, right? So they have no memory of the being interred. They pop out, and they still think that whatever that they were doing is what they're doing now, and that they just got orders to, or I think it was the Dark Eldar that you read that was underwater.
Yes.
And she thinks she's still at a party.
Yes.
And she's punishing these people for laughing at her. So she doesn't see the Necrons. She sees a bunch of people that have been rude at her party. And she's running around killing them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, and this goes all the way back to, for me, the fall of Cadia, where Trazyn's basically tossing people out to stem the flow of chaos, right? I'm here to whatever, I think he was more concerned about the Blackstone or whatever, but, he's just tossing, and for GW, it's great because then they can, it's well, we have these old, we had this old sprue of heresy era plastics that were, so we're just going to toss this unit back out. You can buy this unit again. And it's because Trazen just threw it back into reality.
That would be awesome if they made it so that way. Imagine if they had a rule. This is totally me wishing. They had a rule that was a stratagem, maybe an expensive stratagem, 3 CP for stratagem, where he throws out a Pokeball. Yeah. And you're using reserve points, so it's not free. But you could set aside, make your army 2,000 points, but you subtract exactly how many points for, say, a squad of aggressors.
Right.
And maybe once per game, you could have him throw out a Pokeball, and this could be any unit, that's not a named character from any army.
Right.
And they pop out, and they are considered part of your army.
Right.
That would be awesome.
It would. Like, oh, here's a Leviathan Dreadnought, right? Like that I've had in stasis for, 4 millennia, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe like have it like a once per game thing. And obviously that unit costs points. So you just use it as reserve, or something like that. And he could just toss it. And that would be hilarious. Because now you have this Necron units, and then all of a sudden he just throws out like I said, like a Leviathan Dreadnought, or he throws out, I don't know, like a Predator tank, or he throws out a Carnifex.
Right. Yeah, and for me it's like kind of, so, I one of the things that I've done over the past like few months is, I wrote this email to GW and I sent it in about just like a wish listing thing, I've just never felt they did Inquisitors well in any of their games. So I was like, you need to do Warhammer Quest Inquisitor, right? Like you did Blackstone Fortress, like you need to do that, but for Inquisitor and Warbands, right? But it would also give them a chance to release things like the Hrud, like in isolation, right? Mm-hmm, which would be like, here are some cool models, kind of like the Gellerpox, right? The Gellerpox don't really exist out, like they exist in the universe, but they're like a one-time sort of unique release. They don't really fit anywhere else in any other army. And that's the same with like all these other races.
Or like even a Man of Iron, that one model they have of Man of Iron, I think they have. From the Blackstone Fortresses.
Right. And so, you can use those models in a game like that. You can kind of get back to and be like, hey, I have, So I went on, I had this like multiple page thing that I sent into GW to their rules people. And of course, I'm not going to hear back. You never do. But it's sort of my wish list. And it was sort of one of those things that had been spinning in my brain forever, taking up too much space, occupying too much space in my head. So I finally sat down and typed it all out and sent it in. It was refreshing, but like stuff like this where like Trazen has cubes full of dudes just waiting, just Pokeballs waiting to be released. It's like, of course he has Hrud. Of course he has like Tyranids. Of course he has Space Marines. Of course he has Imperial Guard. Like, he has that Imperial Guard commander that he stole from Cadia before he died. Like, it's like all of this like stuff. It's just really, he has Inquisitors. He has probably plenty of Sisters of Battle and Dark Eldar and Eldar. Like, just so much stuff. Yeah. One of the things I found interesting was how he talked about how the Eldar birthed the god Slaanesh, and how he was just, it was so reprehensible that they were to do such a thing.
Yeah, it's just like, it's like, how dare you kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, but they also are very, they're the opposite of warp, right? Because they're almost, I want to say almost that they were a race that was basically, it's not mentioned, but they were basically all pariahs. They couldn't use the warp. They couldn't use, almost like the Tau in the sense that they had no presence.
Right. And if they had souls that connected, they're long gone now. So I mean, they're
Yeah,
fundamentally
they're-
soulless.
Exactly. And they're just not, then they know that there's the warp there, but they don't do anything with it other than try to hold it back. Like they see it as like an enemy,
Right.
to a degree anyway. And they hold it back, or they used to hold it back with those Blackstone fortresses or in the pylons.
Right.
So we'll see how things go.
Yeah. So, but, we've been at it for about an hour, 20 minutes, hour and a half.
Yeah.
So-
yeah. I think it's about time to wrap it up, probably.
Yeah. So before we wrap it up, you said you have a game coming up to help reteach somebody 9th edition.
Yeah.
What else you got coming up?
I'm probably going to redo my Raven Wing list to incorporate Samael and remove right now I'm using 2 of the lieutenants, the Talon Masters. I want to reduce my emphasis on characters because I have 5 characters. So assassination is very commonly used against me. I want to remove that and start removing some of these characters. Replace a Talon Master with one of the planes, because the plane can do almost as much as what a Talon Master can do.
Okay.
But more longer term, one thing now that it's a new year, I have a personal goal, I would say, and I've had this goal for the last few years, is every year I try to make a new 2,000 point army from an army that I don't already have.
Wow.
So, like Dark Angels are my favorite, right? So I have a ton of models for Dark Angels, but I also have, Adeptus Custodes. I also have Grey Knights and, Demons and Necrons. So now it's a matter of what am I going to do for this year? So by the end of the year, I have a new 2,000 point army of a faction that I don't have any models for. So right now I'm in the debating stage of what am I going to have. And I'm thinking either Tyranids or Imperial Guard.
Ah.
So I'm not sure which yet. I'm leaning towards NIDS, mainly because, it's all flesh, it's all organic. It definitely looks very visually distinct compared to everything else.
Right.
I like the idea of having kind of like a Nidzilla list of having a bunch of big models, big scary models shooting, and like I like the idea of the Swarm Lord. I like a hive mind dude, the Tyrant. I like that kind of stuff. So I'm looking more towards that, but at the same time you have Imperial Guard. And
Right.
I like the idea of having like an armored battalion kind of deal. Or just be like, look, I'm just going to flood bodies in front of you.
Right. Wow.
But I don't know yet. I have not decided.
Well, they did. Krieg that Krieg box is finally getting an independent release. So
Okay.
if that changes, if that's so you get those Krieg guys from the Kill Team boxes are coming out in plastic. So
honestly, if I was going to go that route for Imperial Guard, Krieg is not what I really would prefer visually. Honestly, it's purely because of visuals.
okay.
So that's kind of one of the things is when I make these armies, I still have the idea of like I want to be able to put it on the field and still have it maybe not be like this is going to be the height of competitiveness, but I want it to be like, all right, I don't want to put it on the field and then just be completely dominated. So, but visuals is a very important piece to me for these armies. And while Death Corps of Krieg is interesting, it's not what I would prefer. I would actually prefer, I believe it's called the Vostroyan. No, not Vostroyan.
Mordians?
Mordians, that's it. The ones that they go to war in dress armor, right? Like Marine Corps dress blues.
Yeah.
Because their flak armors. Go ahead.
They've used them in a couple of the new Dawn of Fire novels. The Mordians.
Yes. The second one, I believe, specifically, they had in the Dawn of Fire, because it's taken place on a world that was very pious, cardinal world.
Yes.
And I'm not going to go into it in the detail, but yes, the main Imperial commander that we're centered around there was or is a Mordian general.
Right.
And he has all the characteristics of the Mordians, right? They're very kind of dour, but also very staunch allies, and very much, the more you push them, the more they push back, right? Whereas, Death Corps of Krieg are almost kind of like soulless, we can't wait to die, death is redemption kind of deal.
Right.
Katie is the stereotypical.
Yep.
And I didn't want to go that route. The thing with the Mordians is that obviously they wear dress armor. That's not Cadian armor, which is the standard Imperial Guard. I think there's another site, the Victoria's Miniatures, off the top of my head.
Yes.
They make models that would absolutely fit Vostroyan, the look of a Vostroyan army for infantry. Okay. But they're resin, and they cost a little bit more they actually cost more than the Cadian models. So you're talking a premium.
Yep.
But it is guys that will have like laser weaponry, but are dressed in like 19th century Napoleonic equipment.
Yeah, I did the Firstborn, right? Those were the Vostroyans with the big hats and the wooden guns. When they first came out ages ago,
I think they're metal.
Yeah, they were, and I loved that force. They came out at the same time I'm trying to remember the campaign they were released in, and it was really unique and interesting. And you could buy a big box set, and I was always keen on those, but the models I always loved for Imperial Guard were always the Tallarn Rough Riders, which were riding on these, like, from Forge World, these real, like, these worm snake horse things. And I had a bunch of those models at one point. And then I just, I couldn't get any of the infantry at that time. They were going for silly money on eBay. It was before Games Workshop did their, like, so like they'd have their week-long, like, you buy it, like, made to order thing. So the prices were silly. And so I ended up selling them. I always regretted that, actually, because those models were just so cool.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if I was going to go for Stroyan, I would probably go that route and buy from Victoria Miniatures my infantry models. But then you have to put, like, if I was going to go that route, I would buy a initial batch of 5, put them together and look at the quality and paint them. And then depending on how that came out, would make the decision of, am I going to continue going this route?
Right.
Because to be quite frank, Games Workshop makes the best models out there.
They do.
Right? Like, they're a tier above everybody. Even this Creature Caster model that I have that I mentioned for Nightbringer is nice. It looks good. But from putting it together and even painting it, and when you really look at it, like the individual quality of the cast, it's still 1 or 2 tiers down from Games Workshop of today. It's just it's much better than Games Workshop as of 20 years ago and whenever they made the Nightbringer model. So right. I need to see, because, you know, our standard is Games Workshop. I need to see the quality, you know, in my hands, a finished product of, is this model going to be worth it?
Yeah, I do. I was actually talking to a friend. We have a mutual friend, and he had received something for the holidays from Creature Caster in a big old model, and it had absolutely no directions. And he was took him a while to kind of figure out the setup of how it was all supposed to go together. And
yep, I had the same thing. I had no directions. I had to actually Google the directions, and somebody had a video out on this is how I assembled it.
Right.
And I just followed that.
Yeah, and like, you know, I mean, I remember 20 years ago when Forge World was like, you know, they'd send you a picture of all the components, and on the backside they'd be like, you know, this piece goes here, this piece goes here, and then there are like 20 other pieces, and then they just show the completed model, and it's like, okay, I guess I'm gonna figure this out. But they've come such a long way.
I agree.
Games Workshop, and I just, even Forge World with what they're doing with how they're setting things up, and
yep, and even their more later models, even the Primarchs. If anybody has a Primarch model, the instructions for those are much better. Even the Warlord Titan, those instructions work.
Yeah, I just got a Leviathan, and I'm looking at that Leviathan, and I'm not ready to put it together yet. I washed it, but the directions are just so clear and easy, like just so good.
Yeah, so. And it's that honestly, that whole thing of ordering from Victoria Miniatures is the thing that is primarily holding me up, because I just don't trust their quality until I have a piece in front of me. And whereas I've had Tyranids before. Actually, the very first 40K box I bought was Blood Angels, a starter collection of Blood Angels versus Tyranids. And I ended up selling all those models. They're one of the few models I've actually sold, because I wasn't really going to have any of those. It was just for me to like get into the hobby. And so I know what those models look like. And even when I painted them in a very horrible manner, because they were literally the first models I ever painted, they still look decent. Right. And, you know, pretty good quality models. So it was like a Carnifex and some Gene Stealers and stuff. I actually just picked up that two-piece, the Gene Stealer versus Custodes. So I actually have, part of that is a Patriarch, right?
Right.
The Gene Stealer Patriarch. So I might just paint him.
Right.
But I don't know if I'm going to go NIDS or if I'm going to go the other route with Imperial Guard, because the other objectives this year is to flesh out my Khorne Demon army, because I already have a good chunk of that. I need to flesh it out so that way it makes sense to put it on the table, and then and to finish Ravenwing and like more Ravenwing and finish Deathwing. So those are the goals for the year. So one of those is going to be brand new army. So and I got to start collecting that probably within the next month or so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have like just small goals, like to get the texture on the orc bases for my Speed Freaks, and then I'm going to keep plugging away at Templars. But there's also I have about 1,000 points of Sisters painted, so I painted up a bunch fast, and I never got to the detail work on a couple of them. So I want to go back. So I'd like to cement the 1,000 points of Sisters I have, and maybe bump it up to 1,250 to 1,500. Because by the end of this year, I'd like to have the Sisters at 2,000 points. And I don't think that'll be super hard, because you have so many kind of heavy point units as well. Now you have, things like the Nundum suits, right? The suits, and you have a bunch of different tank models. And so short term, just over the next couple of weeks, is, just taking care of the orcs and their basing, to get the texture on their bases so they're like finished. And then I would like to, I'm going to plug away at these Templars. But that's a slow grow project.
Okay.
I don't have any sort of intention of getting a suitable army in a short time, but I do want to get the armies I do have finished off. That includes the sisters. So.
Oh yeah, I'm like these goals that I'm mentioning. This is for the year, not like in a short term. Like I don't expect to have a 2,000 point army of any new army until, maybe like the demons, because I'm already maybe like a 1,500 points. But
Right.
the like brand new from scratch, like a Tyranid army, I don't have that. I don't have that expected until maybe August, where I'd start I'd maybe have like 15 to 1,500 points painted by then.
Right.
But these are my goals for the year.
Yeah. In order for me to get this sister stuff done, I have to figure out how to use my airbrush, because I need to get the tanks done. And I brushed out one rhino, but I am terrible. Yeah, it is. And I just left so many streaks and brush strokes, and so I have an airbrush, and I just have to kind of pull it out and spray some paint through it. So
yeah. And that's what the airbrush is for. Like it does it much better, and there's no streaks.
Yep. So, well, everyone, I think we'll put an end to this.
Put a pin in it.
Put a pin in it, I suppose. Put a fork in it, and move us on. So you'll be hearing from us again soon. But for now, for our episode 3, I think that we can say a happy good night from Good Morning McCraig.
Yep. All right, then. Everyone, you have a good one, and we'll see you guys again, or you get to listen to us again in another few weeks. Have a good one.
And take it easy, y'all. Bye.